January 22nd, 1943. West of Point Cruz, Guadalcanal. In the previous 72 hours, Japanese snipers hidden in the groves ahead had killed 14 Americans. The battalion had answered the only way doctrine told them to answer: sweep the treetops, rake the canopy with automatic fire, fill the jungle with so much lead that no man could possibly stay hidden up there. The groves kept killing them anyway. So when Second Lieutenant John George stepped out at first light, carrying a civilian Winchester with a hunting scope on top, men laughed. They called it his mail order sweetheart. His captain had told him to leave it behind. Other officers called it a toy. George carried it anyway. 4 days later, they were not laughing. He went forward alone with a captured Japanese bunker as his hide, a canteen, a handful of clips, and a bolt-action rifle the United States Army had never issued to him. The jungle in front of Point Cruz was a world of filtered darkness. Tall trees locked the sunlight high overhead. Every trunk looked like cover. Every branch looked innocent. Somewhere inside that green ceiling, men were waiting to kill anyone careless enough to move. At a little after 9 in the morning, George saw the first sign, not movement, the lack of it. One branch in a banyan tree held too still against everything around it. He kept watching. A shape slowly separated itself from bark and shadow. A Japanese sniper high in the tree, facing the trail where Americans had been moving supplies. George settled the scope, breathed once, then squeezed. The sniper dropped through the branches. George worked the bolt and stayed on the glass. He knew one man that's skilled was rarely alone. A second figure appeared in another tree, lower down, trying to move after the first shot had exposed the position. George led him and fired again. 2 shots, 2 dead snipers. That was the moment the whole argument changed, because the rifle in George's hands was supposed to be obsolete. It was a Winchester Model 70 in 30-06, bought with 2 years of National Guard pay, fitted with a Lyman Alaskan scope, and dismissed by men who believed modern war had already settled the question. The future belonged to speed, volume, and standard issue firepower. The M1 Garand could put 8 rounds downrange fast. George's Winchester gave him 5 rounds and demanded a full bolt cycle after every shot. On paper, the Army was right. In the groves west of Point Cruz, the paper answer was failing. What George understood was simple. Against a machine gun nest, speed mattered. Against a concealed sniper 60 feet above the ground, invisibility mattered more. You could not suppress a man you could not find. You could not overwhelm a position you could not see. First, you had to detect him. Then you had to hit him with the first shot. That was where George lived. Before the war, he had become one of the best competitive riflemen in the Illinois National Guard. He trusted precision more than noise. He trusted a clean trigger more than doctrine. And on Guadalcanal, that private stubbornness suddenly had battlefield value. The Japanese snipers on the island were not amateurs. They climbed high into the canopy, tied themselves into position, and waited for hours without moving. They did not fire often. They fired when the shot mattered. A single hidden rifleman could freeze a patrol, stop a work detail, or bleed a platoon a man at a time until fear did the rest. That was exactly what had been happening around Point Cruz. Now George started reversing it. By midday, more snipers were down. One fired too close to his bunker and gave away his angle. George found him and killed him. Others tried to slip away once they realized someone was hunting them from below with glass and patience. George picked them off when they moved. Word spread fast through the battalion. The officer with the mail order rifle was doing what the automatic weapons had failed to do. By the end of the first day, the mockery was already dying. The next morning, the jungle changed. Rain hammered the canopy before dawn, and turned the ground to mud. When visibility finally returned, the surviving snipers adjusted. They stopped offering clean mistakes. They used bait. One exposed position, another hidden rifle covering it. George recognized the trick because he thought the same way they did. When a target looked too easy, he assumed it was not the real target. That decision kept him alive. Later, when the Japanese answered with mortars, George had to abandon his firing point and dive into a shell crater as rounds tore apart the bunker he had just occupied. The duel had become personal. He was no longer just hunting snipers. The snipers were hunting him back. That is where the story becomes something more than a tale about a good shot and a good rifle. Anyone can sound impressive on a range. Combat is different. Combat is noise, sweat, mud, fear, bad angles, and tiny decisions made when one wrong guess gets you killed. George kept winning those decisions. He kept noticing what should not have been visible, a branch that carried the wrong weight, a patch of darkness that was too deliberate, a firing angle that made no sense unless another man was covering it. By the third day, most of the snipers were already dead. The ones still left were the best of them. One of the final engagements was the kind of thing that stays in memory because it sounds almost impossible. George had relocated after enemy fire and ended up in a water-filled crater, half submerged, with the rifle held high to keep the barrel clear. Ahead of him, one Japanese sniper moved into an exposed position near a set of rocks. George had a shot, an easy one. He did not take it. He looked harder, and then he found the second man. The exposed sniper was bait. Another rifleman was covering the kill zone from farther back, waiting for George to fire and reveal himself. George sank deeper into the muddy water and waited. Minutes passed. The men ahead saw no movement and started to shift positions. They moved past his crater, still looking in the wrong direction. George rose out of the water and shot them both. That should have ended it. It did not. Voices followed. More Japanese soldiers were moving toward the bodies. George had killed the snipers, but now infantry were closing on his position. They found his tracks in the mud and moved toward the crater. At close range, with a bolt-action rifle and no room to maneuver, George fired from the water, killed the first man at the rim, then broke contact under return fire and ran through the jungle with rounds cracking past him. That detail matters. This was never just target shooting in the trees. It was close-range survival inside a jungle that erased visibility, swallowed sound, and punished hesitation. When it was over, the count credited to those 4 days was 11 Japanese snipers killed. The groves that had produced 14 American dead in 72 hours went quiet. Patrols could move again, work details could move again. Men who had laughed at the rifle now wanted to know where it came from and why it worked. The deeper answer was that the rifle did not win by itself. It fit the man. George understood what the battlefield required before the institution around him did. In the open, speed and volume were king. Under the canopy at Point Cruz, the man who saw first and hit first controlled the fight. That was the lesson. Not that every soldier needed a hunting rifle, but that precision optics, patient detection, and disciplined individual shooting could solve a problem mass fire could not. That lesson didn't stay on Guadalcanal. George later carried the same hard-earned understanding into Burma with Merrill's Marauders, and the broader military eventually moved toward the very thing he had demonstrated in miniature. The same Model 70 pattern, once dismissed as too slow for modern war, would later be taken seriously as a sniper platform. George survived Guadalcanal. He survived Burma. After the war, he wrote Shots Fired in Anger, one of the sharpest combat memoirs to come out of the Pacific. What makes the book endure is the same thing that made him dangerous in those groves. He was not romantic. He was observant. He respected skill. even in the enemy. And he understood that marksmanship was not a sport once bullets started coming back. That is why this story still lands. Not because a mail-order rifle embarrassed the army, not even because one officer killed 11 snipers in 4 days. It lands because the battlefield stripped the problem down to its essentials. Everyone else had more firepower. George had the right idea. He slowed down, looked harder, and trusted precision when panic would have told most men to fire faster. The jungle punished noise. George answered with certainty. And for 4 days west of Point Cruz, certainty won.